I told everyone I made a tasteless joke about his anatomy, and now half our friends won't speak to me. They think I'm some cruel, body-shaming monster who destroyed a good man for a cheap laugh. What they don't understand, what nobody gets, is that he was already gone before I ever opened my mouth. I said something unforgivable, sure, but the real crime wasn't the words. It was what I knew and pretended not to. The truth is so much worse than a simple size comment, and I'm terrified that once you hear the whole story, you'll realize I'm not just insensitive. I'm something far more damning. The stakes aren't just my marriage collapsing or sleeping alone in a king-sized bed that feels like a coffin. It's that my entire identity as the wounded party has been erased. I built a narrative where I was the neglected wife, starved for affection, justified in my frustration. But the joke wasn't about what everyone assumes. It was about something that makes me look calculating, not careless. And I'm about to tell you everything, including the moment I discovered his secret, the calculation behind my cruelty, and why he won't touch me now, not because of the joke, but because of what the joke revealed about who I really am. 6 months ago, our bedroom had already become a museum of dead intimacy. Marcus would kiss my forehead like a sister, pat my shoulder like a coworker. I tried everything. Lingerie he didn't notice, date nights he spent checking his phone, conversations that died in his throat. My vulnerability felt like a performance for an empty theater. The night it happened, I was wearing a silk slip he'd bought me 3 anniversaries back when he still saw me. He was scrolling through his emails in bed, his back a wall between us. I said his name twice before he looked up, and when he did, his eyes held nothing. Not desire, not annoyance, just absence. That's when I made my comment. Not about his body, about his capacity to reach me. But I said it wrong. I said it cruel. And maybe part of me meant to. The joke was meant to be a surgical strike at his emotional distance. I'd read somewhere that men respond to direct challenges, that vulnerability in women reads as weakness to a certain kind of man. I'd convinced myself Marcus was that kind of man, emotionally stunted, physically present but mentally checked out. So when I said 4 inches isn't enough for me anymore, I was talking about his effort, his engagement, the pathetic reach of his affection. But he heard what any man would hear, and I let him believe it. I didn't correct him. I watched his face crumple and felt something sickeningly close to satisfaction. Finally, a reaction. Finally, proof he could still feel something. The joke worked, just not the way I'd planned. It was never about his body. It was about mine, and how invisible I'd become in his silence. The real escalation began when I decided to weaponize his misunderstanding. After he rolled over that night and didn't speak to me for 3 days, I called my friend Rachel for brunch. I told her the sanitized version, how I'd made an ill-timed joke, how Marcus was being oversensitive, how his reaction proved my point about his fragility. I left out the context. Left out how I'd been screaming into a void for a year. I made myself the victim of his insecurity, making her complicit in the lie. She laughed, called him a typical man, and I felt validated. I was building my defense before I even understood the crime. Marcus found our texts later when I left my phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. He wasn't snooping. I wanted him to see. That was the first time I chose cruelty over clarity, and it wouldn't be the last. The truth bomb hit 2 weeks into the silent treatment. I came home early from work and found him in the bathroom, door ajar, holding a prescription bottle I'd never seen before. He was reading the label like it might explain his entire life. I stood in the hallway, frozen, as he opened the cabinet and shoved the bottle behind the towels. Later, I checked. It was medication for erectile dysfunction. Not just any prescription, one he'd been filling for 8 months. 8 months of my silk slips and desperate attempts. 8 months of him knowing exactly why he couldn't respond, and never telling me. He'd rather let me think he wasn't attracted to me than admit his body was betraying him. I found his search history too, after I cracked his phone password that night while he slept. How to satisfy wife when you can't perform. Does size affect confidence? Hiding ED from partner. That's when I realized the joke had hit a wound I didn't know existed, but one he'd been nursing alone while I starved. The consequences spiraled faster than I could manage. He moved into the guest room the day after I confronted him, but I did it wrong. I said, I know about the pills, and he went white, then red, then silent. I expected anger, defensiveness, maybe relief that the secret was out. Instead, he looked at me like I'd killed something fragile he'd been protecting. You made that joke knowing, he said, and I didn't correct him. Because correcting him would mean admitting I'd snooped, that I'd violated his privacy, that I'd used his vulnerability as a weapon. So I let him believe I'd known all along. I let him think I was mocking his medical condition. The narrative shifted from neglected wife to sadistic abuser in that moment, and I was too cowardly to reclaim the truth. His brother called me that night, voice thick with accusation. He told me what you said, with his condition, you're a piece of work. I hung up and didn't defend myself. How could I? I'd become exactly what Marcus thought I was. The breaking point wasn't an argument, it was a Tuesday. He came home from therapy with a look I'd never seen, something between peace and finality. He sat me down, our old kitchen table between us like a border wall. My therapist says I need to set a boundary, he started, and I laughed. I actually laughed because the absurdity of Marcus setting boundaries after years of emotional vacancy felt like a punchline. He didn't react. I can't be intimate with someone who sees me as deficient, he continued, and I heard the script he'd rehearsed. You don't understand, I shot back, the words I'd been holding for months. I wasn't talking about your body, I was talking about your emotional absence. But the confession landed wrong. It sounded like backtracking, like damage control. His face closed off completely. Now you're lying to make yourself feel better, he said. That's worse. He was right. I'd held the truth until it rotted in my hands. What I haven't told anyone, the thing that makes me sick when I think about it, is that I found more than his prescription that day. I found an email draft he'd written to me 3 months earlier, never sent. It explained everything, his diagnosis, his shame, his fear that telling me would make me leave. It was vulnerable and raw and everything I'd been begging for. And I read it, then deleted it from his drafts, then made the joke anyway. I wanted him to hurt before he could hurt me. I wanted to be the one who left first, even if I stayed in the same house. That's the calculation behind my cruelty. That email haunts me because it means he tried. He reached out in the only way he could manage, and I intercepted it, judged it insufficient, and punished him for my own cowardice. The joke wasn't random. It was premeditated murder of the man I wished he could be. The full confession feels like swallowing broken glass. What I said that night, exactly, was 4 inches isn't enough for me anymore, Marcus. I need the whole man, not just the parts that show up. And yes, I was looking at his crotch when I said it, because we'd been naked, because I'd just tried to initiate and he'd pretended to be asleep. But 4 inches was the distance between his body and mine in bed every night. It was the emotional gap I couldn't bridge. He misheard because he wanted to. It was easier to believe I was shallow than to face that he'd been emotionally absent for a year. The damning detail is this: he has a condition called Peyronie's disease, which has been causing physical changes. I knew because I'd seen his medical charts when I snooped his email last year, trying to find evidence of an affair. There was no affair. Just this man, silently dealing with his body betraying him, while I created narratives where he didn't love me enough. The revelations fallout has 4 corners, and I'm pinned to all of them. Marcus is moving out. He's taking the dog, the coffee maker, the friends we made together. My sister won't let me babysit my niece anymore because she doesn't want that energy around her kid. My mother said, you've always been harsh, but this is a new low. And I've become the villain in a story I thought I was writing about my own victimhood. The most devastating part is that he's thriving. He has a new therapist, a support group for men with his condition, and he's dating someone who apparently understands him. I saw a photo on Rachel's Instagram before I deleted all my social media, Marcus at a concert, smiling in a way I haven't seen in years, his new girlfriend's hand on his chest. The caption was blessed. I stared at it for an hour, trying to see what she gave him that I couldn't. The answer is simple: she wasn't me. The current state is a rental apartment that smells like other people's cooking, a job I'm about to lose because I can't stop crying in the bathroom, and the knowledge that Marcus is selling the house. He sent me an email, formal and polite, about the sale. He didn't mention the joke, the pills, the email I deleted. He just said, I hope you're well. Those 3 words felt like the final verdict. I'm not the woman he married. I'm not the victim I pretended to be. I'm the woman who couldn't let a man be vulnerable in his own time, who turned his medical crisis into a weapon against him, who chose cruelty over patience at every turn. And now I sleep alone, not because he won't touch me, but because I made sure he'd never want to again. I'm telling this now because yesterday I got a wedding invitation. It's from Marcus and his new girlfriend. They've known each other 7 months. 7 months ago he was still sharing a house with me, still taking his pills in secret, still flinching when I entered a room. And I realize now that he was only waiting for someone who wouldn't make his worst fear come true. I did that. I made his body the problem. I made his pain the punchline. So when you judge me, and you will, ask yourself this: would you have done differently? Would you have been patient while your husband disappeared into his shame? Or would you have reached for any weapon, even one that cut both ways, just to make him see you were still there. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking you to understand that sometimes the monster isn't born cruel. She's made desperate, one silence at a time, until any sound, even a scream, feels like music.